It's me, Mario! Hello!
Super Mario 64 is a game that needs no introduction, and its profound impact on the gaming industry is something that cannot be argued. For years, this game has sat in the N64s of countless gamers, and in the back of the minds of thousands of game developers. Though it could be said that it is nothing more than a 3D upgrade to previous Mario platformers, the ripples of this now quaint little game from 1996 are still being felt. Today, I want to see where those ripples lead me. To step back through the footprints of one of gaming's most crucial titles, and to listen back over 25 years to hear the echo of the industry that is Super Mario 64. To start off, we need to take a closer look at Super Mario 64 itself, and see what building blocks the game is made of. The premise of the game is very simple. You have 120 stars to collect, split between the 15 different courses with 7 stars each, and another 15 spread throughout the hub area of Peach's Castle. Within Peach's Castle is where you'll find these 15 courses, and all but one of them is locked away from you from the start, necessitating that you collect more stars to progress further into the game. Stars are your reward for completing certain tasks, such as defeating bosses, collecting coins, and discovering secrets. You need a minimum of 70 of the total stars to reach the final boss and complete the game casually. This is the gameplay loop of Super Mario 64. Get stars to unlock courses to get stars. Do this until you can complete the game, or until there are no more stars. This is the gameplay loop that would change gaming forever. An important thing to note when we talk about game design is the idea of clones. Doom was an influential game in its own right, and many games that came after were subsequently dubbed Doom clones, with varying degrees of accuracy. Whether or not such a term is legitimate, its very existence is notable. Even without in-depth analysis, many gamers have been able to identify common tropes in game design across particular games, or even genres. In fact, many genres themselves are defined by their roots in a particular game, such as Metroidvania or JRPG. As accurate or inaccurate as these names can be when used to describe a game, they are also never used in the same way either. Some could see it as an insult to label Half-Life as a GoldenEye clone. Some might see it as a detriment to call Saints Row a GTA clone. Some may see it as a completely accurate assessment of Crash Team Racing to compare it to Diddy Kong Racing and Mario Kart. It is practically common knowledge that Dark Souls is a Metroidvania title, when it is technically a hack-and-slash RPG. Some games are just defined by their spiritual and mechanical relationship to other games. Wolfenstein and Doom, Resident Evil and Devil May Cry, System Shock and Bioshock. The former defines the latter, because the latter cannot exist without the former. It's interesting to me in large part because I'm an absolute lunatic, but also because despite the massive influence that Super Mario 64 had, the games that it would play a pivotal role in helping create are completely free from this label. Like, all of them. Even the games in the Super Mario franchise. I have never once heard the phrase Super Mario 64 clone uttered in my 10 plus years of being exposed to gaming discussion. Not once. I get that it doesn't exactly roll off the tongue nicely, but for the games that we're going to discuss, I have never heard even a passing mention of Super Mario 64. For as popular and well-loved as the game is, its influential nature has been completely overlooked, especially in the gameplay department. That little loop I described earlier, just by looking through the games that I currently own and have played, I have found at least 35 games that can draw their roots back to Super Mario 64, with an additional 4 Mario games that used the same formula. To save this discussion from going on forever, I've chosen 3 games that probably wouldn't exist if it weren't for Mario 64. I don't really have any proof that these games were directly influenced by it, but they undeniably share a lot of similarities, so let's jump right into our first game. Jak and Daxter, released in 2001, came out 5 years after Mario 64 and its spiritual successors like Banjo-Kazooie and DK64 had set the winning formula in stone. Jak and Daxter is notable, however, because it was the first game of its kind to use that formula alongside its very own innovations. The Super Mario 60 formula is still here though. Instead of stars, we have power cells. And now, instead of separate individual stages accessed from a hub area, we have a large connected world where we find power cells that continuously open up for searching for more power cells. It can still be broken up into unique stages and multiple hubs, but they all exist together as part of the world around you. This kind of thing was pretty unheard of in 2001, as hub worlds with some sort of disconnected level selection was really common for the time. Popular and obscure games alike used this formula to great effect, making them structurally very similar. I don't think anyone would deny that Spyro and Glover are different in terms of game mechanics, but the framing was always the same, just like Banjo-Kazooie and DK64. And now, only 5 years later, games are starting to play around with that structure while keeping what is essentially the exact same gameplay. Jak and Daxter took a tried and tested formula, and rather than just doing it again like so many others did during the late 90s due to hardware limitations, it used that formula as a springboard for its own ideas. This is worth mentioning because, despite the fact that these two games are entirely distinct, their gameplay almost exactly matches, the only major difference being the layering of the stages. Jak and Daxter is undoubtedly a quality game, and for all the innovations that they made on their own, now that they had the hardware to do it, the heart of Jak and Daxter beats to the same rhythm that Super Mario 64 did. It throws in the stars for cells, it trades red coins for scout flies, and it gets rid of the slides and jumps on a zoomer. It did the same things and made something great, not unlike our next game. Only a year after Jak and Daxter, Ratchet Clank was released, and immediately we're starting to see a trend. Just like with Spyro, Insomniac weren't afraid of wearing their hearts on their sleeves when it came to their stellar list of platformers. Whereas Naughty Dog would actually change Jak and Daxter kind of drastically in its sequel, Insomniac took the good old Mario 60 formula, yes I said it again, and ran with it for years. Ratchet Clank is notable though, because just like Jak and Daxter, the main gameplay loop of finding things to unlock places where we find more things is still alive and well. This time around, our main collectibles are twofold. The first being infobots, which provide you with access to new planets, which provides you with access to new gadgets and weapons, which you can use to find more infobots. Rinse and repeat until Drek. This time, we have traded in the stars and Bowser keys for an arsenal and infobots, but what we haven't traded is what these things do. Just like Mario uses his stars to get through a door, Ratchet uses his bolts to buy his way through certain situations. Just like Mario uses various abilities like the metal cap to get through a course, Ratchet uses his shiny new gadgets to continue progressing through his stages. Just like Mario uses keys to get to new parts of the castle, Ratchet uses infobots to get to new planets. Now, 6 years later, Mario 64's gameplay loop lives on. The heart is still beating and shows no signs of stopping anytime soon. Another year later, and we would see yet again just how far this structure has wormed its way into the minds of game developers. Released in 2003, Battle for Bikini Bottom was yet another 3D platformer that held a torch for Super Mario 64. Instead of stars, we got golden spatulas, and just like the star doors, our progress was locked away until we got a certain number of spatulas. We had to do various different tasks for these spatulas, and the game couldn't be finished until we had a certain number. Despite coming out over 7 years later, after both Jak Daxter and Ratchet Clank, Battle for Bikini Bottom is easily the most blatant clone of them all, a notion only cemented further by its near carbon copy successor based on the SpongeBob movie. Both games contain almost the exact same structure of level by level collectible hunting, and both can be heavily linked back to Super Mario 64. The details will always be different, of course, but it's almost like these games are made from the same template, and just have their assets slotted into the right places. There isn't much else to say for Battle for Bikini Bottom other than it's a fun game with a solid formula that made many other games great. Games like DK64 and Glover, games like Spyro and Banjo-Kazooie, games like Jak and Daxter and Ratchet and Clank, games like SpongeBob, Gex, Sly Cooper, Harry Potter, Rugrats, Bugs Bunny, Rayman 2, Mario's Sunshine, Galaxies 1 and 2, and Odyssey, and we cannot forget the countless indie games that all pay homage to this gaming giant. But a good thing, as we all know, can't last forever. You may have noticed that the 3 games I focused on were all released in the same generation. The formula for Super Mario 64 was massively influential because it acted as a blueprint for 3D platformers, which all saw their peak in popularity during the early 2000s. As these kinds of games started to decline around the advent of HD gaming, the Mario formula saw less and less use. I might just be nostalgic for the games of my youth, but I genuinely think this structure for games deserves to come back. It might just be one of the most rock-solid holding patterns for a game that the industry has ever seen, leading to the creation of some of gaming's most beloved titles. And it's sad that its time in the spotlight is over. Upon reflection, I feel like this formula died for the same reason it worked so well. And as great as Mario 64 was, there's a reason even Nintendo saw fit to put their stock elsewhere over the years. The gameplay loop that was started and perfected by Mario 64 worked because it was simple. Get stars to unlock doors to get more stars. Even for 1996, that was an incredibly straightforward premise for a game. But in an era where 3D games were in their infancy, and some 2D games could even stand to have a bit of life breathed into them, a simple little game with a simple little loop like Super Mario 64 was exactly what the gaming industry needed. The fire started by this game would keep the furnace burning for at least another decade, which at time of writing is around 20% of the industry's lifespan. That's insane. For one game to have that kind of effect is something that some of gaming's best titles can't even hold a candle to. With this formula, game developers were able to crank out some of the most consistently quality and standout games at a time when games were coming out in their hundreds every year, and when gaming would see some of its greatest titles. Unfortunately, nothing gold can stay, and gaming would evolve yet again in the late 2000s, with new formulas and new holding patterns becoming a dominant force in gaming for years to come. Every fire dies eventually, but we had a pretty good one while it lasted. And the truly amazing thing is, everything I've discussed thus far was only Mario 64's gameplay influence over the handful of games that saw their heyday between 1998 and 2006. I did say that the ripples created by Mario 64 are still being felt to this day, and for those, we must keep going beyond the death of the platformer and into the realm of Mario 64's effect on gaming as a whole. Super Mario 64 was a launch title for the N64 in 1996, a console that was the first to integrate an analog stick into its standard controller. PlayStation, despite being around since '94, didn't have any analog sticks on its controllers until '97. The Sega Saturn had a controller with an analog stick pretty soon after Nintendo did, but we don't talk about that. And the Atari Jaguar was showing everyone else how it was done by turning up to the party 3 years early with a 3D capable 64-bit console that could only be operated by a normal controller with a telephone strapped to it. It was such a good idea that Atari promptly died as a console manufacturer just to give everybody else a chance. Suffice to say, Nintendo was the leader in the race when it came to 3D controls, until Sony sorted their shit out, and the reaction to having a big plastic knob to twiddle around is something that nowadays is rather quaint to us, but must have been mind-blowing back when people actually liked the Clintons. I can't cite my sources here, unfortunately, as I can't find them anywhere, but initial reactions to Mario 64 in particular were actually kind of mixed. People had just never done anything like this before, and many weren't sure what to make of it. Of course, analog sticks caught on pretty damn fast when people realised that this shit was fun, but many people in the really early days of 3D console gaming talked about getting motion sickness from seeing a character move around at their command. Some described the experience as downright dizzying, and one rather strange individual said it was, and I quote, disturbing. Again, I'd love to provide a source for this because it was very funny reading about proto-boomers trying and just about succeeding to comprehend new technology, but I can't find the articles. If I do find them, I'll put them in the description. Nintendo, and by virtue Super Mario 64, had once again lit a fire under everyone's ass by not only providing the player with a very intuitive way of controlling a character, but also by giving them a relatively stable control over the camera, something that even the best PS1 games either struggled with or didn't even bother doing. This time though, the fire wouldn't die out before the end of the next decade. Game developers were understandably slower to take on the lessons that Super Mario 64 had to teach about gameplay, but the console manufacturers, they took one look at this on launch and immediately saw the writing on the wall. Analog controls are a must. Barring some handhelds, there hasn't been one console since 1996 to have a standard controller without analog sticks. Even when Nintendo started dabbling in motion controls, they still had analog stick attachments with the Wii's nunchuck, because they had set such a strong standard just a decade before that even they didn't want to try and break from it. Mario 64 may have just been a testing ground for what was basically a gamble on Nintendo's part, but that didn't stop this quaint little launch title from laying the technological foundations that almost every game after was built upon. Far from its continued influence upon the industry, we also see its mark upon the gaming community. Mario 64 rivals even the likes of Pokemon in terms of that sweet, nostalgic real estate, and I feel it can only ever be a point in the game's favour when people continue to discuss it years after its release. Mario 64 has long been home to the inquisitive among the community, with data miners, modders, glitch hunters, and speedrunners all congregating to extract every last bit of value from the game. And if they've been at it for this long, then it must mean that there's quite a bit of gold still in these hills. And if you're into the speedrunning side of things in particular, you'll know that that gold still shines. Mario 64 is a game that will forever remain one of those things that we will always deeply appreciate as gamers. It may seem like a simple little platformer nowadays, something to be enjoyed as a nice trip down memory lane, but that's only because it was able to make such an impact back then, one that still reverberates in a time of technological and artistic advancement. We may never get another game like it again, never see those ripples again, never hear that same echo, but in my mind, that just makes Super Mario 64 all the more special.